What if I told you that one of the greatest betrayals in history didn't happen in secret, but right in front of God, not by strangers, not by enemies, but by people who had just seen miracles with their own eyes, people who walked through a sea that split in two, people who were fed from heaven itself, people who heard the voice of God echo from a mountain, and yet, in a single moment of impatience, they turned away. What they did next is almost unbelievable. But if we're honest, it's not just their story, it's ours too. Before the betrayal, there was glory. The people of Israel had just experienced something no nation had ever seen. They had been slaves in Egypt, oppressed, broken, forgotten. But then God moved, not quietly, not subtly, powerfully. The waters of the sea stood like walls on both sides, and they walked through on dry ground. Behind them, their enemies were swallowed whole. In the wilderness, when they were hungry, bread fell from heaven. When they were thirsty, water came from a rock. They weren't guessing if God was real. They knew. And now, they stood at the base of a mountain that shook with His presence. Mount Sinai. Smoke filled the sky. Fire burned at the summit. Thunder rolled like the voice of eternity itself. And at the center of it all was Moses, chosen, called, set apart. He was summoned up the mountain to meet with God. This wasn't just a moment. This was a covenant, a divine relationship being established between God and His people. Everything was aligned for something sacred. Everything was right. Until the waiting began. At first it made sense. Moses had gone up before. God had spoken before. But this time felt different. One day passed, then another, then a week, then two. No sign of Moses. No word from God. The mountain that once burned with visible glory now stood in silence. And silence can be dangerous. Because when God feels distant, something begins to shift inside us. Questions start forming. Did He leave? Did we misunderstand? Are we alone out here? And maybe you felt that before. You prayed, but nothing happened. You waited, but nothing changed. And in that silence, faith can start to weaken. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly. The people of Israel weren't rebelling yet. They were just uncertain. But uncertainty, if left unchecked, can turn into something far more dangerous. The crowd began to gather. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into frustration. And frustration turned into demand. They looked around, and what they saw was fear. No leader, no direction, no visible God. So they went to the one person left in authority, Aaron. Moses is gone, they said. We don't know what's happened to him. Make us gods, who will go before us. Think about that. After everything they had seen, this is what they asked for. Not patience, not faith, not trust, but something they could see, something they could control, something they could hold on to. And this is where everything changes. Aaron didn't stop them. He didn't remind them of what God had done. He didn't call them back to faith. Instead, he gave in. Bring me your gold, he said, their earrings, their jewelry, their treasures, and one by one, they handed it over. What once symbolized blessing was about to become something else entirely. The fire was lit. The gold began to melt, and in that moment, as the flames rose and the metal softened, something tragic was taking shape. Not just an idol, but a decision, a turning point, a betrayal. And what came out of that fire would change everything. Because when people lose patience with God, they don't stop believing. They just replace Him. The fire died down. The glow faded. And from the ashes, something emerged. A calf, shaped from gold, polished, gleaming, man-made, yet treated as divine. And the people looked at it, not with confusion, but with awe. "This," they said, "is our God." The same people who walked through the sea now bowed to something they created with their own hands. No thunder, no voice, no power, just metal. But in their eyes, it was enough. It didn't stop at admiration. It turned into worship. They built an altar before it. Offerings were made. Sacrifices were given. And then came celebration. Music filled the air. Dancing erupted. Voices lifted in joy. From the outside, it looked spiritual. It looked like devotion. But something was terribly wrong, because they weren't rejecting worship. They were redirecting it. They didn't stop believing. They just changed what they believed in. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Idolatry doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes, it looks like sincerity. People fully convinced they're doing the right thing, while walking in the wrong direction. Up on the mountain, nothing was hidden. God saw everything. The celebration, the idol, the betrayal. "I have seen these people," he said. "They are stiff-necked, unyielding, resistant, quick to turn away." And in that moment, justice stirred, because a holy God cannot pretend sin doesn't matter. What they had done was not small. It wasn't a mistake. It was a complete reversal of everything they had just experienced. And the weight of that decision demanded a response. God spoke again, "Leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them." This was serious. This was the moment where everything could end. Everything they had been promised, everything they had been rescued for, could be wiped away because of one decision, because of one moment of turning away. And here's the truth most people don't like to hear. Sin doesn't just affect the moment. It threatens everything connected to it. But then, something unexpected happens. Before judgment falls, someone speaks. Moses steps forward. He doesn't deny what the people did. He doesn't make excuses. But he also doesn't stay silent. He stands between God and the people. And he begins to plead. "Why should your anger burn against them? Remember your promise." In that moment, one man stood in the gap between justice and mercy, and everything hung in the balance. Because what happens next reveals something most people don't understand about God. He is just, but he is also merciful. And sometimes, those two collide. Everything hung in the balance. Justice demanded an answer. The betrayal was real, the sin undeniable. But then, mercy spoke, through the voice of Moses. He stood there, not as a perfect man, but as an intercessor, a mediator, someone willing to stand between a holy God and a broken people. "Remember," he said, "remember your promises." And in that moment, judgment was held back. Not because the people deserved it, but because mercy was greater. Moses turns and begins his descent, step by step, down the mountain, carrying the stone tablets, the very words of God. But as he gets closer, he hears something. Voices, shouting, celebration. And when he sees it, everything changes. The idol, the dancing, the complete abandonment of truth. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was full rebellion. And in that moment, his heart breaks. In a surge of anger and grief, the tablets leave his hands. They shatter against the ground, broken, just like the covenant the people had already broken in their hearts. This wasn't just destruction. It was symbolism, a visible sign of an invisible betrayal. Because what they broke wasn't stone. It was trust. The celebration ends. The music fades. Reality sets in. Because sin always has consequences. Even when there is mercy, there is still impact. Even when there is forgiveness, there are still scars. The people are confronted. The illusion is shattered. And what once felt exciting now stands exposed. Empty, powerless, false. Now pause for a moment, because this isn't just their story, it's ours. We may not melt gold and shape a calf, but we still build idols. Anything you turn to, instead of God, can become one. Money, success, relationships, approval, control, even distractions. And here's the hardest truth. You don't need to reject God completely to replace Him. All it takes is putting something else first. So ask yourself, what do you run to when God feels silent? Because that reveals what you truly trust. But here's the hope. This wasn't the end of the story. God didn't walk away. Even after the betrayal, He still made a way. And where Moses once stood in the gap, there is now a greater hope, a greater mediator, a greater rescue. But the choice is still yours. Will you trust God, even in the silence, or will you replace Him with something easier? Don't wait until the test comes. Decide now. Because what you choose, when God feels distant, reveals who your God truly is. If this message challenged you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, be honest. What do you think people struggle with most today?